What is your NSFOA culture shock? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. Living in a poor AF village in Southeast Asia, seeing how many parents are awkward with their daughters working as the city if it supports the family. One of my friends was former Navy. He told me his story about going on liberty in the Philippines where he picked up a at a bar, went back to her place, had his fun, and was invited to sleep there, and she would wake him in the morning. Morning comes, and before he heads back to his ship, the girl's mother made him breakfast, and her father sat and made small talk while they ate. He didn't even realize they were both in the house the night before. The parents even invited him to come back for another date with their daughter anytime. Story 2. I'm German, so I'm kinda used to nudity in some places, but Denmark took it to another level. I was an exchange student in Germany, and on my first day there my host family took me to a nude beach. Old people, kids, moms, dads, everyone. Totally naked. I was shocked. And then my host mom pointed out the town brothel on the way home and said I should stop by if I was interested. Edit. Also, some train stations in Germany had brothels next to them with numbered windows, so you could just order a prostitute by number, I guess. Like you're on your way to work and think, oh, looking feisty. Maybe I'll pop in and have a shag. Wild. Edit 2. I also went to Berlin and accidentally stumbled upon the nudist section of a city park. I walked around some corner and there was a fat man totally naked sitting like Buddha with an erection staring at me grinning in the sunshine. Story 3. Not mine but my American GF's first visit to Australia. Our tampons don't have applicators. In the US, the cotton tampon is inside of a smooth plastic tube, with a plunger inside of it so you don't have to put your fingers inside of yourself. You just push the plunger up and the tampon goes inside of you. But that's a lot of plastic waste. I'm American and I lived in Australia for a year, and I was so confused when I shot for tampons for the first time and opened one and it was just the cotton tampon. But I got over it immediately and actually liked it way more because I could fit more of them in my bag. Story 4. Living in a small rural community surrounded by other small rural communities, the amount of secret swingers is astounding. I have some family that lives in a small town and so many people in that town swing. I live in a big city and don't know of nearly as many swingers as my family does. I don't know if people are just more in each other's business in smaller towns or if there actually are more swingers or some combination thereof. Because in a big city there'll be groups, clubs, and events specifically for those alternative lifestyles, and if you're not into that, you won't even know about most of what's going on. I also think it's a strange collision of statistics and chance. Let's say swingers are 8% of the population. If you live in a suburb of an affluent city and the pop is 60, that's 4,800 swingers, which is a lot, but the chance of you knowing them is slim. If you live in a town of 5 people, that's 200 swingers. Chances are, they're your neighbors, and you go to their family BBQs twice a year, as everyone knows. Story 5. I also think it's a strange collision of statistic and chance. Let's say swingers are 8% of the population. If you live in a suburb of an affluent city and the pop is 60, that's 4,800 swingers, which is a lot, but the chance of you knowing them is slim. If you live in a town of 5 people, that's 200 swingers. Chances are they're your neighbors, and you go to their family BBQs twice a year, as everyone knows. During my associate degree, a girl said something cute about me and unexpectedly gave me a hug, a nice warm soft one, and I stood there like, I'm okay. Moments later, another mate shouted at me like, dude, why don't you hug her back, lol, come on. Why are you so cold-blooded? And at that very moment I realized I wasn't very affectionate, or at all, with other people due to the way my family were and raised me, and they're right there, my friend, sucks a lot. Story 6. When I was living in England in the late 0s, early 10s, it shocked me how much more forward the women were compared to American women. If they wanted a hookup, they just tell you, no games, nothing. Was also odd seeing STD testing in nightclubs. You just piss into a cup, they'd give you a drink coupon or something, and if anything was amiss, you'd just get a call to let you know. I remember watching Eurotrip, and them calling Americans prudes in that movie. I understood after living in Europe. Story 7. I, a 35-year-old heterosexual male, started reading smut, and it is shocking how many women are reading smut, and how many of them will happily discuss the smut with me. I bought an old Kindle off a middle-aged mom at a garage sale a few months ago. She said she didn't know if it worked, so I only paid $2. I plugged it in, and it was just full of nothing but smut and Harry Potter. Dozens and dozens of erotic books, and then Harry Potter. That's it. Story 8. How many people cheat? The number of people who are in committed relationships who sleep with other people in general was a surprise to me. There's more cheating than I realized, but also a lot more consensual non-monogamy than I knew was going on. Sadly, it has become culturally normalized. It's not right, and the emotional/mental damage it does to someone can last a lifetime. The most surprising thing about my ex having an affair was how most simply didn't care. They acted like we broke up mutually just because I didn't go nuclear. Everyone, friends and family alike, are totally fine being friends and are surprised when I'm upset about it. I'm literally the weirdo for feeling like she's a crap person for having a 3-month affair. What? Story 9. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and in the Netherlands, topless was the norm. I think I've seen almost all of my friends' mothers topless. It was normal in those days. Breastfeeding? Take off the shirt, pop out the boobie, or take off the bra and start feeding. No matter where you are. Nowadays, it is a shock for me to see that almost nowhere nudity or topless is happening anymore. So a reverse into a cultural shock. Story 10. This is pretty minor compared to most of the posts on here, but it was a childhood-defining moment to the point that I still remember it clearly 25 years later. So my family immigrated to the US from a pretty socially and religiously conservative country when I was 9 years old. While we didn't have full burqas, women were dressed quite modestly compared to the US. So we get off the plane in Los Angeles, get through customs, and finally to the outside world, the U-shaped road in Lax. I remembered very clearly, the first thing that caught my attention in the outside world was a woman with beautifully large boobs wearing a low-cut, light blue tank top. In hindsight, she wasn't unusually dressed by American standards, but at the moment my male monkey brain was in sensory overdrive, having witnessed the most boobs I had ever seen. I must have been full on gawking, because my mom half smacked me on the back of my head and scolded me for staring. Story 11. How many people do coke? I think this is something that is almost a professional culture thing in a lot of places. Hopefully, that makes sense. I remember hanging out with a friend of mine when she was working in her first few years of finance, when she was in the analyst area, and the guys she was working with weren't all on coke. But it was absolutely a safe bet to assume anybody was. There were a few people who didn't do it regularly, but I think the number that never did it approached 0. It's just part of the lifestyle. She felt the pressure to go out on at least Friday nights and drink with the office, which is why she had me come a couple times. We never dated, but I think she let people assume we were, so most would be less horny, and the ones that pushed it anyhow could be shut down with prejudice. Just a whole different type of partying. The guys I would go drinking with on long construction projects when I was a field engineer were just the standard beer swilling. I say that affectionately, but the finance bros operated on a whole other level of messed up. Which follows, you can drink a lot more when you're hitting the bathroom every so often to keep your buzz going. Story 12. I live in Japan. The biggest shock for me has been how much consensual non-consent is ingrained in the culture here. Women are expected to resist to some extent, and men enjoy it when she resists. I've met women who like it when guys blow through stop signs. It makes her feel sexy and desirable as, even though she's saying no, his desire for her is so great that he can't stop himself. Last year on Twitter, I came across a post from a female escort who described a conversation with a client where he asked if she was enjoying herself, and she bluntly told him no and that she was only there for the money. A guy replied that if he was told she wasn't enjoying it and didn't really want to be there, that would only make him more excited, and a lot of men agreed with that sentiment. Story 13. I visited South Korea years ago for a wedding. In a visit filled with culture shock, 2 NSFO things stuck out to me. First, the amount of prostitution available was mind-boggling. It seemed I was never more than 500 meters from some kind of brothel. My dad and I still talk about the sexy time service listed on the menu of services offered at the spa of my parents' Western-style hotel. Second, I'm a fairly basic white boy next door type. I'm 6 tall and I'm told approachable. I've never had more women hit on me or more lovemaking than I did in the month I was there. I barely did anything except book a space in a love hotel. It was mostly Korean women, but expats and US military women just clocked to me. That wasn't the case before or after I visited Korea. That was the horniest place I'd ever visited and was just a giant surprise. Story 14. Interactions with men from a particular cultural and racial group who have recently migrated to Australia in significant numbers, and how many of them seem to have issues around consent and respect for women's boundaries generally. Like, not all of them obviously, but a disproportionate number compared to similar interactions with men from other cultural and racial groups. It was really surprising and jarring until I spoke to women from that same cultural and racial background and learned what an endemic issue it is back home. Story 15. This is probably getting buried, but still. On the evening of Jan 19, 2008, I had to take a dump at the restroom of the Central Long Distance Bus Station in Kunming, capital of the Chinese Yunnan province. It was a squat toilet, which is not something completely foreign in my native country of Bulgaria either. However, between the cabins there were no walls. I mean, it was something like that, ankle-high at best. I'm as white as it gets, and Chinese tend to stare intently at white people all the time, at least back then, maybe less now. I probably didn't take more than a minute or two to do my job, as I was trying to get through it as fast as possible. But the number of people that came into that restroom over that interval was much, much higher than you'd be used to in most other countries. Also, we kinda exchanged looks with the guy squatting in the cabin next to me. They all saw me, and not just saw, they were staring at me, studying me, some of them marveling at me. For some of them, I may have been the first white person they'd ever seen live. So yeah, I felt totally exposed. For the 10 months I lived in China back then, it was definitely my biggest culture shock in any way, not just of the NSFOA type. Girls, what's one habit that makes a guy instantly unattractive? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. Lack of respect for others, especially in how they talk and treat people, is an instant turnoff. When they treat you well because they like you, but then are cruel to other women they don't find attractive. That'll be you one day. Women also seem to enjoy the disrespect of others. I've literally experienced a DoorDash situation where this dude in our smoke sesh started yelling to him like, "That's mine," thinking he's funny and crap. And it's not his dash, and I'm sitting here like, dude, let the dude work his job, he's gotta hustle. But all the girls sitting in the smoke sesh thought it was funny. Nothing turns me off more than blatant immaturity. Even my wife laughed, just disappointed. Story 2. Lying over mundane things usually leads to not communicating over things that could be considered confrontational. This needs to be higher. Goes hand in hand with blaming anyone and everyone for their mistakes. If someone is constantly complaining that they've been screwed over here, there, and everywhere, I automatically assume they're the problem. Girlfriend went crazy on them for no reason. Boss had it out for them, so they're fired. Assholes at the bar always pick fights with them. This was that small red flag in my last relationship that just kept getting bigger and bigger. It started with just lying about how late he was staying up, and then became lying about getting fired from his job. 4+ years of catching someone in small lies as it builds up gets exhausting. Story 3. People who are conflict avoidant are usually so because being honest in the past was met with conflict. For example, an ex once asked for my opinion on her clothes. I politely said I didn't think they suited her, and she then went on for 30 minutes about how much they cost and how she bought them especially for me and how ungrateful I was. After that, I learned that with her it's better to tell her what she wants to hear, because it spared me the 30-minute complaining. If you want to hear truth, then you need to be sure you can accept it without having a really negative reaction. Story 4. This applies to anyone really, but being super negative all the time. Nothing is right. Everyone else is the problem. They simply cannot just sit down and enjoy where they are and the people they're with. I understand where this comes from, but you've got to learn to find your inner peace with where you're at. Things won't be perfect. Maybe the store didn't have your favorite beer today, or someone cut you off. But you've got to learn to breathe and let that go. That anger and dissatisfaction will kill you slowly, and it's always heartbreaking to see. Story 5. Cruel to animals. When my husband and I were in the very early stages, I remember texting him something like, "I hate to be that girl, but I've got 3 cats at home." He texted back, "Please be that girl. I've had cats my entire life, and I can't wait to meet all 3 of your kitties." And honestly, if that wasn't the biggest green flag in this context, then I don't know what is. And he was fast-tracked to being introduced to my 4th kitty with green flags like that. It's such a turn-on when guys are good with animals. Story 6. Poor control over their anger. No quicker way to make a woman feel unsafe than to seem deregulated with your emotions. And shutting down emotions, but calling it stoicism, is the other extreme side of the very same coin. I've never met a self-proclaimed stoic who didn't just silently stew until they exploded when they let things out, normally on a single person in private, and focused on a logical issue. rather than just feeling their emotions as they happen and expressing them in a normal and healthy manner. Look up water torturer. All emotions are healthy, and a complete lack of emotional expression is a bigger red flag to me even than an inability to regulate themselves when very angry. Story 7. Can't do anything for himself. I'm talking about basics like laundry and washing dishes, basic cleaning. I had a friend tell me about when they were still married. Her ex-husband would never do anything around the house. His mentality was since she was a stay-at-home mom, it was her job to take care of the house, but she would overstimulate it a lot of times, and he still wouldn't do anything. What got me was when she said that he would spit his chewing tobacco in bottles, but would never throw them away, and leave them all over the house. He even spat down her straw one time, and she drank from it. I almost couldn't believe it when I heard it. It blows my mind that some people can really be like this. Story 8. Condescension, especially when he doesn't know if the crap he is talking about, or thinks he's smarter than he is. One of the most embarrassing moments I've had was when I was being really condescending about something and I turned out to be wrong. I felt like the world's biggest ass. I couldn't apologize enough, and now I'm really careful not to be condescending no matter how right I think I am. Stopped talking to one of my guy friends because of this. He's smart but doesn't realize where he's dumb and is extremely arrogant. Then the patronizing starts, clearly because he's getting defensive over his belief being challenged. We were friends for a long time, but he called me brainwashed by left-wing media for being concerned about Project 2025. It was the last straw. Story 9. Not being able to communicate, getting annoyed or irritated, and not telling me why, or randomly getting angry, never being able to take control over their actions. This is real. I had an ex that would randomly get moody and brooding, and I'd literally have to force him to say what was wrong. I know that's not healthy, but otherwise he's literally never discussing his feelings, but would treat me like I didn't care. It literally always turned out to be that I wasn't giving it to him enough, which made me feel like I had to in order for him to be happy in my presence. Or when they tell you to communicate, and when you do, they'll make it your fault, and you create problems, while you're clearly and calmly trying to find a solution. Story 10. Only talking about himself, not asking the other person anything about themselves. Some people really don't realize they do it, especially when they're lonelier people. Some really just don't have people to talk to, so when they do, they start spewing about themselves, thinking it's how conversations work. It's genuinely draining, but it can be corrected. Some people think conversations are interviews. I don't want to ask you 20 things you can't live without. It's a give and take on subjects you both are interested in. Story 11. Putting down other women to try and compliment you. Edge. I'm so glad you don't wear fake eyelashes and makeup like some women. I'm so pleased you're not one of those girls that dresses like this. At least you're more intelligent than most women. You dude. In a similar vein, I have 2 degrees and am working towards my doctorate. And I get a lot of, oh wow, you're actually really intelligent. Which usually means I didn't expect you to be clever, because you have big T. The actual way to compliment would be something like, I like your style, you look great. And I enjoy our conversations, you always have thoughtful and engaging things to say. Really, in any sort of situation, you should focus on what's good about the person in question, not what's bad about others, in your opinion. Story 12. Inability to clean/maintain their space. Fun? I'm not signing up to be your new mommy and spend all my time cleaning up your fecking messes. If you're a grown adult and you can't wash a dish, sweep a floor, or do your laundry, then you're definitely too immature to bother sleeping with. Mental illness, neurodivergency, or disability aside, which is a whole other matter to consider and discuss before joining a relationship. I'm talking strictly learned incompetence. They grew up having everything done for them and still expect that treatment as an adult. Absolutely not. I'm your partner, not your replacement parent. Story 13. This is true for both sexes, but unfortunately considered more acceptable for men. If he's not nice to others who are not his family, friends, or superiors. You used to be easily able to spot those by seeing how they treat the service staff on the first date. However, some people learned women look for that specifically. Now you need to notice carefully how he talks about other people. If all or most other women are annoying to him except you and his mom, red flag. If people need to earn the right to be respected by him, red flag. Basic decency is the bare minimum. You can perhaps lose that right. But no one needs to prove he deserves it if they didn't do anything terribly wrong. Story 14. If he doesn't see why he should perform basic acts of kindness, like telling a stranger they dropped their wallet, because it's not his problem, red flag. Animal abuse and or joy of seeing others suffer, gigantic red flag. Basically, if he doesn't see others as deserving, he can never truly love. No matter how nice and considerate he is to you when there's no conflict, and he deems you worthy, he can never truly love. He can own, but that's not love. Story 15. I can't stand if someone starts baby, calling or other sweet names or girliest at me when we don't even know each other yet. I don't know the correct spelling for the words in English, babe. That's not my first language, but I hope you all get the point. That's just something that makes me want to puke, run, roll my eyes, and move in the middle of a forest in an abandoned house alone, would slash my cats forever. And every single one who I have met and started to speak with, they all have started to speak like this in the first 3 days or so. If I have told you that I don't feel comfortable about this, it's even one. It's just a cute nickname too. Don't be so negative 3. What should I call you then? I have decided that being a crazy cat mama who crotchets is all I need. What is a true story from your life that sounds made up? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. When I was young, 8 to 9 years old, I loved to climb a very tall pine tree on the mountainside near my backyard. I climbed this tree almost every day because the view from the top was incredible. One day, I was climbing so I could get a good view of the sunset. When I was almost halfway up the tree, I heard a sound next to me and loomed over to see a mountain lion, just chilling on one of the branches directly across from me staring at me. My heart probably stopped beating for a minute long. I just slowly climbed back down the tree and had a very paranoid walk back home. Story 2. My stepdad drove me into the woods with an axe, chainsaw, and black bags in the trunk and said if I went to live with my dad he would kill me and that my bio mom had given him permission and I had 2 weeks to change my mind. My dad, probably under advice from his lawyer, didn't do more than ask me to tell one of my teachers to please call him if I didn't show up one day and why. So I did, and my teacher was a mandated reporter which opened up a CPS case. The kicker is that my stepdad took me to McDonald's after and then to school. All of which I told CPS. Apparently my stepdad claimed I was lying. The lawyer was able to obtain video footage from McDonald's and basically say, why would she lie about this but not that? Dad got custody and I spent 6 months unable to sleep thinking I was going to get gone. Story 3. I was on a boat in Colombia, going from the beach in Cartagena to Tierrabamba. The motor died and we were drifting. Got pretty real. The swells were not enough to tip us, but with us being powerless the boat was turned sideways and we were susceptible to the roll. We ended up eventually drifting fairly close to the island and there were very long piers. I saw that we might get close enough to leap onto it, so I gathered a rope up at the bow of the boat. The guy at the motor tried to tell me not to, but he was the guy who didn't have any plan for the motor dying, so screw him. I timed a swell as well as I could and jumped as powerfully as I could. At the time I was young and very athletic. I barely made it, but I landed on the dock. I pulled the boat in and the rest of the people were relieved and very, very grateful. They actually cheered. I felt like a badass and was on a high for the rest of the day. Story 4. I went swimming at night in the ocean and my money and debit card was in my pocket. When I got out of the water, my pockets were empty. I went back at dawn with a snorkel and found the card. Saw that shiny dove on the back in the seagrass, and he can found a few of the bills too. I would have had no way to get money at all had I lost it. Story 5. I dropped out of high school at 15. I bounced around in call center jobs with no plan and no prospects. One day I met a girl there and we became friends. She was an aspiring author. She said I seemed smart and asked me to help her figure out how to become an author, and she'd make me her manager and share the book royalties with me. I found office jobs crushing and really bad for my mental health. I was suicidal at some points, but the only thing that kept me going was helping my friend accomplish her dream. Fast forward 10 years, we're best friends. I helped her become a best-selling author. We've sold millions of books. We live up the road from each other. We're both happily married, and I don't have to do any work other than help her with her books. I work under 10 hours a week. I won the lottery basically, that's how it feels. Story 6. Lucked out in a job interview. Got to the interview 15 minutes early and asked to wait in the hiring manager's office. On his table, there were a number of pamphlets. I got bored and read one of them. The FM was a little later than expected, so I had about half an hour before the interview started. He asked, "What is it you think we do here?" and I recited the pamphlet. He goes, "That's a pretty good answer. I receive an offer the next morning. 6 months in and I'm doing well, he finds the pamphlet. He asked me during my 1-year review if I read the pamphlet, and I laughed, confessed, and then he gave me a glowing review and a raise. Story 7. Way back, just after high school, my dad got a girl pregnant. They split, and she was already with someone else and planning to marry him when she discovered she was pregnant. My dad wasn't in a good place, signed rights away, new dude adopts the baby. 18 years later, my parents are divorced and remarried, and I have a stepbrother, who just so happens to be best friends with my half-brother. In fear that he'd be brought around my sister and I, and him looking exactly like my dad, they had to sit down and tell everyone, including my half-brother who didn't know his dad wasn't actually his dad. Not as crazy as some of the stories here, but still crazy to me. Also crazy, my mom and I share a birthday. Half-brothers twins also just happen to have the same birthday as well. Story 8. Doctor here. In the preclinical years of medical school, most medical schools have students enroll in anatomy lab, where we dissect cadavers as part of the course. One of the anatomy labs had a cadaver who had passed away from complications from kidney failure, according to the identification tab. While that anatomy team was dissecting some of the leg and buttock muscles, they found a bullet in the gluteus medius. No idea how it got there, and totally unrelated to the cause of death. I like to imagine the guy signing paperwork to donate his body to science, thinking that the med students dissecting his butt would get a funny surprise. Story 9. I lived in an abandoned building from the age of 9 through 13. I wasn't alone. It was a community of us who just didn't have family or shelter. Then my mom got better, had been in a hospital, and my grandma found me and coaxed me home. I did not want to leave my new family for some reason, but memory is sort of sketchy on that time. It was in NYC in the 70s, Harlem. Story 10. On a ferry from Wales to Dublin in 1994, I fell asleep on a bench in a quiet private lounge where I thought I was alone. As the ferry got underway, someone came in to turn on the TV in the lounge. I heard a voice say, "Can't you see this gentleman's asleep?" The ferry worker explained that the TVs are supposed to be on while the ferry's in motion. The man said, "We're the only ones here. You can keep it off." I opened one eye to see who it was that was looking out for me, and it was Sean Connery and his wife. I woke up to thank him for letting me catch some shoe time. I had spent the day cycling from York, England, and needed the rest. Turns out he was traveling to Dublin to be the Grand Marshal in the Street Paddy's Day Parade. Story 11. I work in a job where there is a lot of pressure to make connections and bring in money. Got an email from a random small company just before I went on holiday, asking for a Zoom call in the next few days. Decided that for once I was going to draw a line in the sand and told them I wouldn't be available several weeks. Went on holiday somewhere 500 miles away and did some sightseeing. A few days and I ended up at a bus stop in a quiet rural area, waiting for the bus back to my hotel. It is only one bus an hour and there is a while to go. But it is a nice day and I was enjoying being switched off from work, so I didn't mind just standing there. I look behind me and notice a building, which is in fact the exact company who had asked to speak to me. So after telling them I wasn't available to speak to them online, I completely randomly ended up standing outside their building 500 miles away on the same day they wanted to talk to me, with some time to waste. Story 12. I go to ANIM conventions. In 2007, I was at a convention in Austin, Texas. At the time, there were some cosplayers that would come in and wear the same outfit all weekend. By Saturday afternoon when this happened, they would smell pretty bad. Well, this one guy decided he wanted to end this once and for all. Dressed in camo, he came in sporting 2 cans of El Cheapo local brand air freshener. He then started spraying cosplayers and shouting, "Take a shower." The first 2 were just shocked by it. Some panicked and ran. I froze in place. The third one he hit was a young woman who ducked right before he sprayed her, and he got it right on her face and in her eyes. She let out a very loud, blood-curdling scream. That's when security got to him and hauled him off. Worst part about it was this. About 2 years later, I was on a website and someone else was talking about it. They declared that this was an urban legend, and there was no way this could have happened. Story 13. I've posted this before, but in high school me and my friend were roasting each other. This has always been something I destroyed people at. I told him he was so ugly he had to roofie himself to masturbate. Fast forward a few years, we're at a bar drinking and talking to these 2 girls who were clearly interested in hooking up with us. They went to the bathroom, and he roofied the drink of the girl he was talking to. They're coming back from the bathroom, and I start acting like a fool to distract my friend and switch the roofed drink with his. We were all drinking Sam Adams, so there was zero suspicion. He drank the drink, and I told him we'd be right back. We went outside, I told him what happened, and we left. Did not look up too weird after that. Never talked to him again, and still friends with both women 20+ years later. Story 14. Working on a building site that used to be a graveyard, we constantly dug up coffins. They had to be buried at another location, but the cost of each coffin was more than the building site had considered in their budget. We had the job of opening coffins and putting as many bones into one coffin and resealing. Nobody had been buried at this site within at least 100 years. A painter got thrown off the job for keeping a femur bone to stir his new paint tubs. Story 15. I won tickets to a Toby Keith concert. Before he was super big, the concert was in a small field. That's not the crazy part though. The way I won the tickets is far more interesting. There was a contest on the radio if you called in and could tell them about your crazy, but true plans for the weekend. The best story would win tickets. It just so happened that I was going to my grandmother's surprise wedding that weekend. It was a 100% true story. My grandmother was engaged, and they were going to get married at some point when they could get everyone together. It was a second marriage for each of them, and they were both in their mid-late 60s. So, Glenn planned a surprise wedding for them. It was cute and fun. Bonus fact, I took my fiance's now wife, sister to the concert since she couldn't get the day off. What's the craziest story you've heard of a couple breaking up? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. The pretty girl in my class got married and had a kid with a decent guy. She was cheating on him with another local dude. Married dude found out and went to confront the other guy. Other guy shot at him, hit him in the back. Married guy escapes but dies on the side of a road from a gunshot. Shooter claimed self-defense and got off. Victim's family told wife and dude to get out of town or they would get wasted. She took the kid and left town with the guy. Feel bad for the kid living with their dad's killer. Far as I know, the wife has never returned. Edit. This happened around 2010 to 2011, Mississippi. Story 2. I don't know if they broke up, but this was how someone found out her pilot husband was cheating on her. When a family in Canada adds a child, they receive a monthly tax benefit. It's a monthly payment dependent on your income, but for a while there was one that wasn't income tested. It was universal. Miss Pilot got a higher than normal check, so she called our revenue agency to check, the CRA. They said it was for baby girl pilot, born date. What happened was her husband had a kid with someone else. Other woman gives the baby pilot's last name and lists him as the father, and the payment accidentally gets added to the wrong file. Story 3. A truck driver gets married. He and the wife buy a nice house. He's on the road paying for it. One day he comes home, and the wife is gone and 6 months of bills and a foreclosure notice is on the table. For 6 months, she took every dollar he made and kept it for herself, until she eventually split with all his money. This happened to my cousin in Denver, who was a trucker driver. Not only did his wife not pay the mortgage or bills for their home, which resulted in foreclosure, but also, when she left their 4 kids behind too. Story 4. I had an old coworker who was almost retired and did one of those dinner kits with her husband. He was an and a consultant who traveled for work for at least 2 decades. They found out that he had fathered 3 kids that were now adults. Who knows how many more? She divorced him after 42 years of marriage. I remember her crying in the office very vividly. Those DNA tests are wild. I was adopted and found out my dad was a traveling gun salesman who seduced my mother, who was a recent college grad who was working the front desk at the counter of a hotel he was staying at. He was apparently quite the ladies' man, according to her, and the one half-brother I've found so far who knew him. I'm wondering how many more there are, honestly. I've only hit up one of the DNA testing companies, and I'll be hitting the others this year. Story 5. Heard this one from my old hairstylist. She had a female friend who was dating this guy who had a pet pig. It was huge, like a full-grown pig. The pig hated the woman and pushed her out of bed to take her place next to her boyfriend. One day, she had enough and told him it is the pig or me. He told her that the pig was there first, so he dumped her and stayed with the pig. Man, that must have been a blow to her self-esteem. Story 6. Couple had been dating since middle school. Stereotypical teen sweethearts, everyone thought they'd get married. One day she isn't at school and he isn't doing great. She tried to kill herself the night before, and he wouldn't say anything about it. It was odd since she had no history of depression and was an all-around happy person. She finally starts talking to people and what happened gets out. Her boyfriend had been her mom from the beginning. The whole relationship destroyed her parents' marriage. Dude ended up having to go to a different school over the drama and hate he got. Story 7. This one couple I know would purposely break up in public and then make each other jealous by flirting with strangers before they eventually get back together. Like they would just ego trip on getting attention from another person before deciding they were too afraid to lose the other. It was kind of fun to see which one of them would get more jealous of the other. Although, whenever the guy was winning, she would be a scary level of pissed. Story 8. Dude was 22, girl was 19. Guy lived in Seattle, girl lived in Mississippi. They met online and fell in love. Guy would fly down every month or two to take her out and spend time with her and her family. He would bring her family gifts every visit. Her family absolutely adored Guy, hoping he'd marry their daughter. One of the cutest and most perfect couples ever. Just a romance out of a Disney movie. Almost 2 years later, Guy decides it's time. Packs his bags and drives across the country to move closer to her. They were both super excited. She was his whole world and his future. Less than a week after moving, the girl cheated on and left Guy for someone with a perm and Harry Potter glasses. Guy drowned himself in alcohol and ended up taking his own life a few months later. He was my best friend. He didn't deserve that. Just a wild situation to break up in. Story 9. When I was in my early 20s, a friend of mine had a girlfriend who was bipolar but took medication to control it. One day they decided to take mushrooms and go to the art museum and enjoy the high. Well, little did he know she stopped taking her meds. High is dying down, so they get in the car to leave. She's driving and starts asking if he loves her and how much and would he die for her. Starts speeding. They get up to about 60 miles per hour and smash into the back of a car stopped at a red light, which pushes that car into traffic, and the driver is killed instantly. Both my friend and his girlfriend were injured, but and the entire time they were pulling her from the car and hauling her away, she was trying to take her clothes off and grab him to have lovemaking. She was taken away to a mental health facility, and he somehow came to my birthday party a few days later and told me this whole story when I asked where his girlfriend was. Needless to say, they broke up. I have no idea what happened to her, but I'm sure she was charged with manslaughter. Story 10. Story told to me by a friend. Guy and girl meet online. Both married and in different countries. Guy was in US, girl was in Australia. For over a year they talked, developed strong emotional bonds, and built their whole lives around getting out of the situation they were in with their respective spouses, and did so. The whole plan was that the guy was going to move from US to Australia to be with her. And after all that destruction they met, and there was no physical chemistry. Not sure if it was him or her. Story 11. My whole life changed in a moment. I just had my 6th anniversary with my husband. Our child was 5. I sent him to work with a kiss. By 11:15, I had found a video from a hidden camera in our bathroom showing my 14-year-old niece nude. By 11:20, I had called the police and had emotionally separated from my ex. I was shocked when I realized he wouldn't go to jail that day. I figured out how to get him to agree to stay with his parents. I let him come get whatever he wanted, but I called his dad to come pick him up. The next day I got protective orders and he never came home again. He is in prison and will be a lovemaking offender for life. Story 12. Friend's boyfriend was building a house. He moves in with her during construction. The plan is she will move in with him when the house is ready. He asks her input on architecture details, etc. Moving day arrives. They're all set to move in. She goes to work with the movers coming that day. Comes back and the movers had only taken his stuff and not hers. She calls him in confusion, and that is the first time he tells her he's having doubts and doesn't want to move in together. She's completely in shock and crying. He doesn't even have the balls to break up with her, just moves out and then never calls her again, and she's like, well, I guess we're over now. Could not have been done in a more chick way. Fast forward, she's very happily single. Story 13. Dude I knew in high school was dating some girl. She didn't seem his type, but whatever, I'm not gonna judge. One day, he's driving her home after a bunch of us hung out at the local coffee shop. She lived pretty far out in the country, so it was a fairly long drive. 45 minutes or so if memory serves. He has the radio cranked right up, to the point they can't even speak. After about 15 minutes of driving like this, she turns the radio down and asks, "What are you thinking about?" To which he replies, "Just trying to figure out how to break up with you," and then proceeds to turn the music way back up and keep driving for 30 more minutes. I can't even imagine the awkwardness. Story 14. A coworker told me the story of a married couple who managed 2 regional offices of our consulting firm in the same major U.S. city that had their marriage dissolved during the merger of our company with our competitor. During their absolutely bitter divorce, the combined company began consolidating the 2 offices and the battle lines between the spouses were drawn. Staff were being fired if they took direction from the wrong spouse. There were bitter shouting matches in the office nearly every day. And when one spouse was selected to head up the consolidated operation over the other, it triggered a lawsuit by the jilted spouse citing hostile work environment, etc. 4 or 5 folks were fired for backing the wrong spouse and more quit because the environment was so toxic. Our company now has a strict policy that spouses cannot work within the same company division. Story 15. Well, this happened to me. My ex, I guess, was seeing another girl behind my back, but me and him lived together. I guess she wanted him to leave me so they could actually be together. Well, instead of just breaking up with me, we go out to a bar one night and he roughies me. While we are there, I got kicked out when I started walking funny. We made it to a gas station and I collapsed. He called 911 and put a weed pipe in my purse. I got arrested for public intox after waking up from a coma caused by being roofied and possession of a paraphernalia for the pipe. After a couple weeks in jail, he moved in with that other girl and a week or 2 later collapsed on the floor and died. His liver and kidneys were crap from drinking. He was 29. I got out of jail the day he died. That was the craziest breakup I've ever had or ever heard of. Lol. What is your "it's not what it looks like" story? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. Sister went to the bathroom and I hid under her bed to scare her when she came back in. She came back wearing only a towel. Turns out she was trying on clothes or something. I yelled loudly, "Hey, I'm hiding under your bed, and I'm coming out with my eyes closed." At first I thought to stay put and sneak out later, but figured that would seem way worse when she sees me come out of her room, and is like, "What?" Told her. Innocent scare prank turned into creepy peeping Tom situation. Story 2. Own a horse as a kid. Partner went with me a couple months back to visit him at the stable he lived at to visit him. Said horse has a habit of nipping, not out of aggression, to show affection/play. Horse was nuzzling his head onto my chest and bit right by my tit. Gently pushed his head away, but that crap hurt. Went home with my partner and was getting undressed for some quality time. He took a look at me and went, "What's that?" I looked down and there was a giant forming bruise/bite from where the horse nipped me. I quickly explained, but he found it hilarious. Story 3. I worked on a low-budget movie that never got finished. For one scene, we needed scenes from the crime, gory bloody pictures they would put up on the board in the police office. Dumbass I worked with dropped them off at Walmart for printing and enlargement, back when that was a thing. He did not warn them. When we went to pick them up, he got pounced on by police and had much explaining to do. Also, the same guy. I had made 2 corpses from skeletons, using the old tissue paper and latex method. The same genius just tosses them into the back of his pickup truck to take them to the set. Got pulled over for speeding. They pretty much were pulling him out of the driver's side window while he was screaming, "They aren't real people," over and over again. When they finally touched one and realized it was plastic, they let him go while ticketing him for everything they could because they were pissed. Personally, I was thrilled my work was taken so well. Story 4. I worked in a supermarket when I was younger and my boss found me one day lying on my stomach in the aisle with my arm fully outstretched holding a large jar of pickles. This was long before planking, but he still thought it was something being done for the lols, and started chewing me out before a customer intervened and explained the situation. The fact of the matter was I was walking down the aisle when out of nowhere the jar just slipped off the shelf and I dove and caught it. That lady saved my ass that day, and the clerk who was ringing her up got our secret signal, which meant many items were accidentally not scanned. Story 5. Found my then girlfriend's panties in the laundry of my house and packed them in my book bag to give back to her. Brought them with me next time I visited, and of course they weren't hers. Thing is, I didn't cheat, and they definitely didn't fit anyone else I would have known in recent memory. We weren't exclusive for more than a couple weeks at that point. She kinda just hit me with a palm face and an eye roll, and we never talked about it again/laughed it off in the moment. I still don't know where those underwear came from or if they were planted or what. Story 6. I was staying over at a friend's cottage in the country with my girlfriend, now wife. A bunch of my friends were there as well, male and female, but we got the spare bedroom because we were a couple. We all went to bed. After about 20 minutes, the bed we were in collapsed, making a terrible clatter. Instantly, the whole house erupted in cheers and laughter. Reality: the bed was very rickety. No one had actually slept in it for a long time, and we were just peacefully resting in the bed when it just collapsed. But of course, everyone assumed we were screwing up a storm and literally broke the bed. Story 7. Was filming a cheese commercial for a rather large brand, and while filming in a dark barn, I snagged and tore my pants wide open. I didn't make a scene. I asked a friend if he had spare pants, and it turned out he did. While we had a bit of downtime, I snuck away to change and opened the first door I could find. As it turns out, it was the milking room with all the cows. No one was there and I didn't have much time, so I ripped out the torn pants and started changing quickly. Of course, mid-change, the director, producer, and farm owner opened the door to see me pulling up my pants surrounded by cows. Let's just say there were a lot of confused faces by me nervously saying, "I can explain." Story 8. Used to have a bait TikTok account I used to troll my local football team. Got bored and deleted TikTok from my phone. Fast forward and my guff records a video of me on her TikTok that went semi-viral. Reinstall TikTok to have a look at the comments. Later that day, she links me to a video which I open. It's a private video she only sent to me. Watch it and realize I'm still signed in as my fake bait account. Delete the bait account and think nothing of it. GF sees that the only person who has seen the video she sent is some random-ass account on TikTok, my trolling alt, and accuses me of having an alt account to talk to girls on TikTok. Can't prove it was all trolling because I deleted it. Story 9. When I was 5, someone had gotten into my uncle's blue spray paint sitting on his porch, and they had sprayed some of it on the porch. He lined up me and my brothers and checked our hands for any blue and saw blue all over my hands. I frantically tried to explain as a 5-year-old that it was from coloring markers from earlier at school, but he had none of it and marched me to my mother to expose me. My mom took a look at my hands and easily identified the difference between blue markers and spray paint and called my uncle an idiot. It was actually my middle brother, but he was wearing gloves, so there was no transfer on his hands. I wasn't going to be a snitch to that idiot uncle though. Story 10. More like, it's not what it sounds like. My daughter, who was a toddler at the time, told my wife that, in the middle of the night, Daddy comes into my room naked to play. It took me a second to figure out what she was talking about and a lot of praying that I sounded believable. My daughter was having a night terror 2 weeks earlier. I got out of bed in the middle of the night wearing only boxer briefs to see what the problem was. I ended up acting silly with her and joking around to try to ease her mood and get her ready to go back to sleep. Story 11. A long while ago now, I was walking home from a friend's house. We'd been smoking and drinking, so I was a little out of it. It was around 1 a.m. and I was almost home when I saw this little old lady doubled over and struggling to walk. I asked her if she was okay and if she needed help. She said she was fine, but asked if I could help her home as she didn't live too far away. So I gave her my arm for her to support herself and off we went. Her home wasn't that far, but it was slow going. At this point, I had already decided that I was going to ring an ambulance for her, but thought I'd get her home first. When we eventually made it to her home, she took her key and opened her door, only to collapse into her house and pass out. And then the house alarm went off, and then her neighbors appeared. Luckily, the neighbors believed me and the old lady managed to get some medical attention. Story 12. When I was a teen, I went on a road trip about 6 hours away to meet some friends. I brought a female friend with me cause it sounded fun. We arrived at the mutual friend's house, and they show us our room with a single bed. I was mortified, and as soon as they left us alone, I told the girl that this was my plan, and I'll see if I can find a couch or something. Thankfully, she was cool with non-sexually sharing a bed. I awake in the middle of the night with a pretty severe asthma attack. My inhaler is on the nightstand on the other side of her. The rest of the room is covered in various boxes, making a walk around the bed time-consuming and dangerous, so I get a bit closer and reach over her, carefully, to grab the inhaler. My hands are shaky and I knock it to the floor. I realize I have to climb over her to grab it. I sit up, throw one leg over, and reach down, grabbing my inhaler and taking it. I smile in relief, look down, and I'd woken her up in the middle of the night by straddling her. She just closed her eyes and went back to sleep. Story 13. When I was a teen, my bud and I got invited to a dinner, midday meal these old men had every Wednesday at one's pawn house. So we're all eating and the old men are talking about some trial that's been of interest in the community and circumstantial evidence. One old man tells this story. When I was 13 or 14, we had a couple of milk cows. One morning, Dad and I went down to milk the cows. We got finished up, and I had to piss real bad. So I walked out and around the side of the barn. As I was pissing, one of the calves walked right past me and I, just on the spur of the moment, grabbed it by the tail. While it pulled me off balance, I was stumbling behind the calf with one hand holding it by the tail and holding my D in the other hand, trying not to piss on myself when Pop walks around the corner. He doesn't say anything, just turns around and walks back around the corner. Now my dad went to his grave believing I was trying to screw that calf, and I will never convict anyone on circumstantial evidence. Story 14. I just got back to my college dorm from work, where I had spilled quite a bit of lemonade on myself, and I checked in with my gef when I got back. When we got in my room, she dropped something. I think maybe her chapstick, but can't remember, behind my mini fridge and was bent over to try and find it. I was taking my lemonade-soaked pants off and was planning to change into something clean when my brother, who was my roommate at the time, walked in. He still makes jokes about that from time to time. Story 15. Years ago, my team did a cabling job to add some registers to the garden center in a Walmart. This kind of work is done overnight because there are much less customers in the store. There were cables in the conduit already, but plenty of room for 2 more. But we were on a clear glide, wire pulling lubricant, so we grabbed some KY from Health and Beauty. We would often grab things at night, drinks, hardware, whatever, and keep the packages to pay for it before we left in the morning. That morning, 4 guys went through the checkout line with 6 empty energy drinks, a couple of snacks, and an empty bottle of KI, which we informed the cashier was empty, because we used it in the garden center the previous night. What is the craziest real-life plot twist story you have? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. When I was 5 years old, I remember going to a wedding reception for one of my friend's older sisters. I vaguely remember that it was scandalous that she was young, 18, just graduated HS, and he was much older. That's all I knew, and it didn't come up much in conversation with my friend or their family. 10 years later, I'm in high school on the debate team, just chatting with the coach about random stuff, when we get to talking about the team before he was coach. He told me that before him, another teacher was the coach who got kicked out for having a relationship with one of the students on the team. He told me the names and my jaw hit the floor. That was the wedding reception I was at. Story 2. My girlfriend of 2 years moved a couple hours away to go to school. We saw each other most weekends. The weekend before Valentine's Day we were together, and it was great. The next weekend on V-Day I go to see her at her parents' home. I see through the window as I walk up to the house, where her fiancé are showing her parents an engagement ring. Asterisk edit. Additional plot twist as listed in below comments. They got married, and after 6 years she discovered his other wife and kids. He must have been a sweet talker, all right. Thank you all for the concern. This was 26 years ago. I'm doing fine. Story 3. Not a plot twist per se, but I met a guy online a few years ago, and we started hanging out and became good friends. In 2016, he got a Facebook message from a young man telling him that he was his father. He gave his mother's name, and sure enough, my friend had slept with her a few times around when he would have been conceived. He showed me the young guy's Facebook page, and there was a picture of his mother, who looked very familiar to me. I looked at her profile, and sure enough, it was my best friend from high school older sister. She had a kid when she was 16, and he lived with my best friend for a couple of years, and I would babysit him quite a bit. I have about half a dozen photos of me with him when he was a baby. Story 4. First roommate in college was super Catholic and did not approve of my older Beth. As an attempt to save me, she thought of inviting me to her friend's celibacy celebration while I was doing homework in the Commons. A chill wind picked up and I sensed it was time for me to leave. As I turned around, I saw the only doorway blocked by a circle of people holding hands and quietly chanting, "No lovemaking until 30. No lovemaking until 30. As I approached to try to break through the circle and further chanting got louder. I eventually got out, but this chick threw away all of my high-end lovemaking toys and Suicide Girl book. I was done with living with her and got out after just a quarter. Over a year later, a few friends and I were comparing horror stories about roommates we have had, and I shared my story. A new friend told hers about a super noisily masturbating lesbian. None of the others had much to say, so they voted between the two. Mine won by a small margin, only to find out both of our stories were about the same roommate, just 1 year apart. Story 5. My uncle went through a bad divorce a few years ago when his then wife came out as a lesbian and left him for a woman. He was extremely heartbroken and devastated. Then a few years after that, he revealed that not only was he gay, but he had a serious boyfriend the entire time he was married. The reason the divorce did him so hard was because she was able to finally be honest about who she was, but he didn't think our conservative Catholic family would accept him. When he finally did come out, though, the general family reaction was, "Ooh, that explains a lot." Story 6. I taunted my little sister her entire life about the fact that she looked nothing like me and our dad. I always made "you're adopted" jokes about her and stuff. It became an inside joke between us. I'd tell her we found her on the doorstep, and she'd say, "Thank God. That means I'm not actually related to you." My parents kind of frowned at it because it was mean, but my sister could take a joke, and she knew I was just teasing her. She joked about it herself. Found out a couple years ago that she was the product of a short-lived affair. My dad accepted her as his own and my parents kept it a secret from everyone. They told her last year. I still make "maybe you're adopted" jokes about her, but they're 100x funnier now. Story 7. I heard there was this couple who could not conceive kids, but their neighbor had like 3. They couldn't afford artificial insemination. So the guy approaches his neighbor and asks him to impregnate his wife because they really wanted a kid. The neighbor obliges. For months, no pregnancy. Finally, the neighbor's wife admits to the guy she cheated on him to get pregnant. Ended up the neighbor was firing blanks. So afterwards, this guy who wanted his wife to get pregnant ended up suing the neighbor for breach of contract. I'm not sure what happened after that. Story 8. Coworker breaks up with bartender and starts pursuing me. Tells me the ex has been stalking him and won't leave him alone. He makes a point to publicly call out bartender at work for being weird. Tells her to leave him alone. We start dating and things are cool for a few weeks. Then he invites me over for a small party, and oddly enough, the ex is there, so I keep my distance from both of them as I have no idea what is happening. A few hours in, the ex changes into pajamas and I realize he got back together with her at some point and never told me. The next day at work, I find out he told everyone that I tried to seduce him / make him cheat on the bartender. They all believed him and treated me like garbage for months after that. His behavior towards me got scarier in and outside of work, and I couldn't tell anyone because I was the lying boyfriend stealer. I never knew depression before this fiasco. Story 9. I know someone in the healthcare field. She told me a story about how a woman tested positive for Instant, and my friend suggests that she bring her partner in to be tested as well. The next day, the lady comes in and brings her boyfriend to be tested. Then the lady tells my friend to wait a minute, and this number male walks in. She said couldn't be more than 15 and hands lady what appears to be keys. He then hugs the boyfriend. My friend thinks he was in the car and needs to have parking validated. She said it happens more often than you think. Nope, the kid was there to get tested as well for sleeping with his dad's gift. Friend had to report it. I don't know what came of it, but that's some weird crap. Story 10. One of my buddies was living in a dorm at university his freshman year. A couple weeks in, his stomach was hurting constantly as soon as he would wake up in the morning, and he decided he should go to the doctor's. The doctor asked him what his daily diet consisted of, and my friend tells him he always drinks a protein shake right before bed. The doctor says to quit drinking the shake before bed and see if that helps. So friend didn't drink the shake that night and goes to sleep. He wakes up to his roommate trying to take off his pants. It turns out my friend's roommate was putting drugs into his protein shake so he could doom him while he was out. The drugs are what was upsetting his stomach. Story 11. I used to have a friend named Tiffany in middle school. I wasn't so good with people, and I was a little rough around the edges. I was very jealous because she was incredibly dainty and feminine, while I was a begrudging tomboy. In middle school, her very sketchy and violent father withdrew her from classes, and we lost contact. She was homeschooled for a while, and then she and her mother escaped to a battered women's shelter and set up a new life in Kentucky. I learned all this from the grapevine. I found her mother, brothers, aunts, and uncles on Facebook, so why couldn't I find her? Over the course of 2 years, I searched every few months for her online, desperate to reconnect and apologize to the friend I had such intense jealousy for, and explain that I was unintentionally rude because I envied how feminine she was, while I felt like a brick wall of a girl. Finally, one day, her mother replied to my friend request, and I found out the reason that I never could find her name on Facebook. He goes by TJ now. Story 12. One of my buddies was living in a dorm at uni his freshman year. A couple weeks in, his stomach was hurting constantly as soon as he would wake up in the morning, and he decided he should go to the doctor's. The doctor asked him what his daily diet consisted of, and my friend tells him he always drinks a protein shake right before bed. The doctor says to quit drinking the shake before bed and see if that helps. So friend doesn't drink the shake that night and goes to sleep. He wakes up to his roommate trying to take off his pants. It turns out my friend's roommate was putting drugs into his protein shake so he could rape him while he was out. The drugs are what was upsetting his stomach. Story 13. Moved across the county in June 2013. Still kept in regular contact with my family, mostly mom, on the phone or Skyping or whatever. Everything seemed normal, nothing big going on. Got a call from my brother, who still lived at home, in March 2014. Turns out that almost the whole time I'd been gone, my mom had been talking to a couple different guys behind my dad's back, and was leaving that day to go stay with the one she wound up with. No one ever mentioned any kind of marital problems to me. I still talk to everyone from time to time, but my brother hasn't talked to my mom since. Even extended family got a little shook up by it, from what I've heard, and things just aren't the same. Story 14. When I was 15, I started dating my male friend after he asked me out. We were in fairly close for a long time, and a lot of our friends said we should get together, so it kind of felt inevitable. He ended up breaking up with me after a few months, and I was sad for a while, but we stayed friends, so in the end it was all chill. However, whilst we had been together, we were never really affectionate in public, or at all, which was down to my insane anxiety. And a rumor started that we were each other's beards. We were both gay but pretending to date each other to cover it up. Laughed it off at the time because I knew I was straight. But goddamn, if it isn't 3 years later and he's got a boyfriend, and I'm away from home lusting after uni girls. Well played, rumor mill, you called it. Story 15. We were at a college fundraising event, and our friend Dom was desperately and obnoxiously hitting on any female in sight during that time, including me, but anyways. There was one girl in hat who started hanging by our group's table. To prevent Dom from coming on strong to that girl, and so she didn't feel uncomfortable by Dom, my friend told him she was gay. Dom left her alone. Fast forward a few days, and friends, including Dom, are sitting at lunch when that girl comes and starts talking to one of the girls at our table, and somewhere along the lines that girl said to female friend, "Stop it, you know I'm gay." We had no idea she was actually gay, so we were dying when that happened. Everyone has at least one good story. What's yours? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. I was fishing with a friend in a small pond a few years ago. My friend cast out a few times and went to reel in, but he snagged something about halfway back. He thought it was just a branch or some weeds, but when he pulled it up out of the water, his hook was embedded in the balls of a 10-inch purple girl's toy that was burned on the end for some reason. I thought that was pretty hilarious, and I'll probably never forget it. Story 2. Was asked to dress as a whale mascot for a parade. Rode on the bumper of an ancient fire truck on the hottest day of the year. Some combination of CO and heat caused me to begin projectile vomiting within the costume. Then I passed out. Luckily, I had my flippers secured enough to keep me on the truck. Last thing I heard was, "Mommy, what's wrong with that whale?" as I began dangling unconscious for the remainder of the route. Came to as they were loading us into a flat to get back to our cars. Dad made me ride on trash bags home. 20 plus years ago, I can still smell the moment. Story 3. I came back to the US after living in England for 4 years. My friend failed to meet me at the airport, so I rented a car to drive 50 miles to my home. Confused by the new construction around the airport, I stopped at the first gas station to ask for directions. "Me? How do I get to the main road going east?" Clerk: "If you go east, you'll go into the ocean." He pulled out a map, and surely enough, I had flown into Charleston, South Carolina, not Charleston, West Virginia. I spent the night in a motel and flew out the next day with a good story and minus $300 in my pocket. Story 4. I was 17 going clubbing with friends who were all 18. I have a somewhat late birthday, and 18 is the legal age here in the UK, and was using an ID that looked a bit like me that my brother had found on the floor. I had already had ridiculous amounts to drink and stumbled up to the bouncer and gave him my ID, my actual ID. The confusion on his face made me realize this, so I slurred out the words, "Oh sorry man, wrong one," and proceeded to swap them round. I don't know why I thought that would work. Needless to say, it got confiscated. At least I got a free ride home from the police. Story 5. Mine is something that happened about a week ago. A woman got out of her car. She was the driver, and then looked me right in the eye and started screaming about how much of a crop I was. I had never seen her before, and I had just turned out of my neighborhood, so I didn't do anything to anger her. Everyone around me in the other cars looked just as confused as I was, so I just started laughing and she just got back in her car. The rest of the ride to the gym was normal. I will likely never get an answer to this. Story 6. Well, there were 4 guys at my school who used to smoke weed and then drive to parties or somewhere. One night, they came to a roundabout traffic, and one of them had the glorious idea. Hey, we never ever drove in a roundabout, backwards. Yeah, let's do that. So they turned the car, kicked in the gear and drove in there. And sure enough, bam! They hit another oncoming car. They were completely messed, stoned out of their minds and freaking out. Not long after the police arrived, the officer went to the other car first. Well, after a few minutes, the cop comes to the 4 guys and tells them, well, boys, you can go. The other guy is pissed drunk and claims that you drove backwards into that roundabout. Story 7. On middle school, there was a couple kids who were really into all Japan-related stuff. They were kinda weird and outsiders, but actually really good kids. They never had anything against anyone, but sadly couple known bullies had a habit of picking on them. One day I saw again those bullies picking on those Japan kids, so I decided I had enough. I went to those guys and asked them nicely if they could stop picking on those kids who never bothered anyone. They attacked me physically and, well, I had to use my own physical force against them. There were 3 of them bullies and I managed to beat 2 of them to ground. Third one ran away. I got expelled for 2 weeks. When I got back to school 2 weeks later, everyone called Tetsu. I found out that those Japan guys had named me that. Everyone has called me that since. After that event, everyone stopped bothering those Japan guys. A couple years ago, my friend told me that Tetsu is apparently Japanese and means iron. Apparently, they gave me pretty badass nickname. Story 8. I went to a private boarding school and the food was horrible. We had a town trip every week, but it was limited to seats on a small bus, so you had to sign up. If you weren't there when the list came out, you did not get on. My friend was an RA and always put me on the list with the other RAs. When I got into town, I would beeline to Togos and buy 3 to 4 footlong subs. At the time, that was told $16 for the lot. When I got back to school, I would cut them into 1 slices and sell them for $3. All gone within the hour. 1 slice doesn't seem like much, but Togo subs, then pre-yum buyout, were packed and on thick rolls. I did this nearly every weekend and always had cash. Story 9. I've always loved a bit of a flutter, so I had this grand plan since I was 18. At roulette table 22 on my 22nd birthday on the 22nd of the month, I planned to put $22 on number 22 at 22:22, 10:22 p.m. I got there at 10:15 and me and my mates were waiting for the glorious moment. A few of them were yelling, it's time, but my watch said 10:21, so I said I'd wait. The croupier spins it up, says no more bets, and ding ding ding, it lands on 22. Everyone was shocked and frankly annoyed at me for it up. But I was a bit drunk and rather cocky, so I simply said no, now it's 10:22, and placed my bet. The ball spins and spins, and lands firmly in 22 again. We all went nuts, even the croupier. Cashed out my $770 and at the bar. Best story of my life so far. Story 10. On vacation in Mexico, one friend is lying naked in bed, and another one starts to annoy him, and they get into a fist fight. Another friend comes in and swings the naked guy around into the mirror, shattering it, and then pins him down. After they calm down, we call the staff up to fix the mirror. The employee pulls out a camera and takes a picture of the broken mirror, and then of the naked guy passed out on the bed. Laughed so hard. Story 11. My first day of first grade, I was waiting for the bus with my mother. The street I lived on connected to a very busy, huge hill of a main road. I watched this woman zoom down this curve on a bicycle going way too fast and hit a pothole. She flipped her bike and flew over her handlebars and hit a car that was coming up the road. Traffic stopped and my mom ran to this lady. She took her shirt off and started wrapping her head with the bleeding. I stayed with this lady while my mom ran back to our house and called 911. This was the early 90s and cell phones weren't a thing. I guess life was a little more trusting back then too, because no one thought twice about a 6-year-old caring for a bleeding unconscious woman in the road. Kicker it is, none of these passengers in stopped cars did anything but stand around and watch. I truly believe it was this strange and traumatic moment that made me the terribly overcautious paranoid child I was and pursued nursing as an adult. I will never ever forget that lady, and I never knew what happened to her, either after the ambulance came and took her away. Story 12. We have an outdoor mall in my town, and it has a couple soda machines that take credit cards. I was going around trying out a card and only had $0.43 on it. And no, I couldn't afford the $1.50 bottles of soda but was bored. One worked. Was surprised and tried again. It worked. Used a Costco gift card just for fun. It worked. Used my driver's license. It worked. So of course I used the Costco card and my friends, and I emptied the machine at 10 at night. We got the cops called on us because someone thought we were breaking the machine. We got pulled over leaving and were told to wait there while another car checked on the machine. It was physically fine, so no reason to keep us. The cop asked why we got so many sodas from the machine closed to 100 of them, and I said I had a lot of change to use. The machine worked for a couple months, and I would stop by and get a couple sodas once or twice a week. I went one day, and it was being worked on, so I left. It didn't work when I tried again. Got 120 plus free bottles of soda. Story 13. When I was around 18, I went to a golf club at midnight with some friends. We went around the course hitting golf balls for maybe an hour until we reached the driving range at the clubhouse. After maybe 15 minutes, a pickup truck with large spotlights on the truck bed left the nearby road and drove onto the grass towards us. We panicked and split up running in different directions. I ran in a circle around the clubhouse courtyard and then jumped into a bush and hid as the pickup truck drove by me. After a while, I was able to get away from the area and saw police motorcycles driving along the road. We found out the club had some break-ins prior to our little adventure, so they were on high alert. A couple of my friends that ran a different direction tried to walk through some fields that turned out to have electric fences, so they got zapped trying to cross it. Story 14. My wife and I were scheduled to fly to New Orleans 3 days after Katrina hit. Needless to say, we had to reroute our destination. For a $50 rebook, we settled on Cancun. We had flown out of Charlotte and were about an hour into the trip. The pilot came on the intercom and told us to look out the left side of the plane, and we could see the space shuttle taking off from Cape Canaveral. Pretty cool all by itself. 10 minutes later, he told us to look out the right side, and we were passing over an enormous hurricane. I think it was Rita. Both of those in one flight 10 minutes apart was pretty amazing. Story 15. One time when my girlfriend and I first started dating, I was naked under her blankets. I remember I took a crap earlier, but I must have not fully wiped, because when I got up to leave for the night, she texted me that I left a surprise on her blankets. Not knowing what it was at first, my guff goes down to smell it, maybe thinking it was chocolate or something else. Nope, she smelled my crap skid mark on her blankets. What is the one story you want to tell that you can never fit into a conversation? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. I live in Maine in the same town as Stephen King. I have worked at several stores when I was younger, such as Home Depot and Walmart. He has come in sometimes. He recognized me when I worked at Home Depot from Walmart and said, "You really need to stop following me." Jokingly, of course. He was a pretty cool dude. Bought some screws and lumber. Story 2. So the wife loves Disney, and I love the Philadelphia Flyers. I took her to Disney to propose, and everything's magical. The next day was my birthday, and we are waiting in line when the woman in front notices my Flyers hat and says, "We're a Flyers fan." I said yeah as I look at her husband, and it's Danny Breyer. So I got to ride the Tower of Terror with one of my heroes. Also, we had nearly identical outfits on. Also, it was Danny's birthday too. Edit. I've only ever gotten to tell this story to family. No one else cares enough about hockey to know who I'm talking about. Story 3. One time me and my brother were being signed up by my parents to do a Rugrats Campbell Soup commercial. My parents were both in chairs in front of this desk talking to a man, and I was sitting leaning against the wall by the door behind them. Then a hand comes through the door and clamps around my mouth, and I get dragged out of the room. He's dragging me down the hall, and I'm trying to kick and scream, but he's this 6'2" white guy with a long beard, and I can't budge or make a noise past his hand. Then halfway down the hallway in the lobby, the receptionist looks up at us, and he lets me go. I run back to the room and sit on the floor between my parents' chairs. The guy comes in again and whispers something to the man my parents are talking to and leaves. It still makes me angry today, because when I told them this story, they didn't believe me. I was 5. I'm 27 now, and now they believe me. It was so traumatizing, I still remember it. Story 4. I used to deliver pizzas. I roll up to this one house, waltz to the door, have a knock and start waiting. When the cicada starts dive bombing me, kamikaze style with rage. Like I could almost hear it screaming at me. This went on for the several minutes that my customer wasn't answering the door, and then the cicada conveniently flew away right as the door popped open. So I'm sitting there stressed, kind of in shock with the pizza in my hand, and tell the customer what happened for some reason. They don't care. Whatever. I walk back to my car, get in. The cicada is in my car. Attacks me again. One of the most surreal exchanges with nature I've yet encountered. Story 5. I got done with my bartending shift in a college town over a summer and headed over to my friend's house for after bar. Everything in this town was walking distance, and since it was summer, it was fairly quiet night at around 4:00 a.m. as I'm walking home from the after bar by myself. Suddenly, a couple of guys come up behind me, completely wasted riding a tandem bike. These guys were barely keeping this thing on the street when a car drove by, slowed down, and a girl from the back window of the car leans out and flashes her tits at them. The guys crashed their tandem bike into a curb in a fantastically comical way, and the car sped off. I miss small college town life. Story 6. My girlfriend and I were at 7-Eleven, and Dog the Bounty Hunter was there. My girl drives a smart car, which is adorable in its own right, but as we came out of 7-Eleven to leave, Dog held the door for us, and then when we were getting in the car he said, "That's one cute car." My girlfriend had no idea who Dog was until I told her. Then she couldn't stop giggling that one of the most aggressive bounty hunters out there thought her car was cute. Story 7. When I was about 8 years old, I was playing outside with a friend and her little brother, 2 or 3 years old. My friend was slowly riding my bike on the sidewalk, and I was walking beside her, but her brother insisted on riding his tricycle on the middle of the road. It was a dead end without movement. There's a funeral home nearby that often left their hearse parked on that street. Little guy was right behind the hearse when it suddenly starts moving backwards. I quickly pulled him out of his tricycle as he was about to get ran over. It still creeps me out how the kid could have died that day by the same hearse that would have taken him to his funeral. Sometimes I see him on the street and wonder if he remembers he almost died that day. Story 8. I was going to an on-field concert after a baseball game. So once the game was finished, a stream of people, myself included, are going down the stairs to reach the field entrance. I start hearing shouting and a scream behind me on the stairs. I stopped and turned around to see what was happening, and somehow I caught the arm of a woman who had been falling down the stairs, the cause of the commotion. I hauled her to her feet, and we sort of just stared at each other for a moment before continuing down the stairs. I will never know how this happened so perfectly, and it will never happen again, but I felt like a ninja. Story 9. Okay, so when I was about 6 or so, I was in the ball pit at a McDonald's play place. The other kids and I were playing this game that involved grabbing whatever kid tried to escape the ball pit and throwing them back in. So this one kid tries to escape and I grabbed his leg. He was an amputee and I had grabbed his prosthetic. I was 6 and didn't know it was even possible to lose a limb. His prosthetic came off and suddenly I was holding this stranger kid's leg in my hands. I thought I had ripped his leg off. I screamed, I cried, I apologized, and I ran to my parents who had to explain the concept of an amputee to me in a McDonald's. Story 10. One day I was driving to my parents' house. The way to my parents is on a pretty active highway, but about halfway on there is a small town. I was at the end of the town when I see something black in the road. At first I think it's a piece of tire, but then he raises his little head up, and I swear to heck we made eye contact. It was the tiniest black kitten. Luckily, I was going slow enough to drive over him and not over him. I immediately pull over and run back into the road and snatch him up. I didn't look before I ran into the highway and a semi was coming in the lane I was in. I ran back, tripped and fell flat on my ass, and the semi stops in the road and honks his horn. I scream sorry and hold up the kitten like Simba. The truck driver gives me a shrug and a thumbs up and goes along his merry way. I gave the kitten to my mom and she named him Midnight. He's crap. Story 11. I went to the Grand Canyon years ago with my parents. A couple of stops and we get out at a lookout where there is only us and this biker couple. She was sitting on the edge of the canyon with something in her hand and he was videotaping her. We had to walk past them to get to a trail that led into the canyon. It didn't take me and my dad long to see what the couple was doing, so we stopped and tried to give them space, but my mom kept walking. The woman dumped something into the canyon, and at the same time a wind blew out of the canyon and at my mom. The biker couple watched what they had dumped out fly into my mom's face. It turns out that it was the ashes of her brother, and his last request was to have his ashes spread at the Grand Canyon. What followed is the most awkward 10 minutes of my life, as they talked to my mom about the departed. At the end of the conversation, the lady says, "Don't feel bad about it, he loved to meet new people." My mom responds, "Well, it was nice to meet you and your brother as well." Story 12. In 2011, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. It was 4 days before my 17th birthday. When I got home from the hospital that day, I wanted to put myself in a better mood, so I watched Rush Hour, and then I watched Rush Hour 2, and then Rush Hour 3. Fast forward to a couple months ago, I volunteered at a high-profile event that had a crap ton of celebrities. We weren't allowed to fraternize with the celebs and ask for pictures and autographs and stuff, but there was one celeb that I needed to slightly break that rule for. At the end of the event, I made sure to be near the exit and wait there for Detective James Carter himself. I approached him, I shook his hand and walked him out while explaining to him that Rush Hour got me through one of the worst days of my life so far, and it made me smile during a time that I had no business smiling in. He stopped dead in his tracks, looked at me, and thanked me for telling him. He then gave me a hug before sincerely wishing the best for me and leaving the event, and that's what happened when I met Chris Tucker. Story 13. Nobody cares about mountain biking, but I had a fantastic crash where I fell off a cliff and landed in a shallow frigid river, and when I got up I realized I had landed on my bike and the pedal had punctured my ass cheek. I walked in the river 2 kilometers back to the car, pushing my busted bike. The key fob was pooched from the water, so I had to use the key, but my hands were too cold to work, so I started the car and drove with my elbows. Cell phone was wet, so I drove to the ranger station. The ranger station was closed to the season, so I tried my cell. Hands were so cold I used my tongue. It worked, but no reception. Kept driving, bleeding all over my car until I got to a gas station and had them call me an ambulance. The medic wondered why I loaded my bike into the car before getting help. Considering everyone I know has avoided my biking stories for decades, I'm very surprised I got gold. Thank you. Story 14. Me and some friends went to the Captain America Winter Soldier blue carpet premiere in London. We got there early enough to be right by the fence for autographs, selfies, whatever from the cast. It was a school day though, so I felt bad for the kids who showed up in time for the event, but not early enough to get in line. I had a bunch of school kids in front of me, pushing me out of range for selfies, and I was fine with that. But then here he comes. Samuel L. Jackson is mere feet from me, and I am separated by a wall of people. I can't get a selfie, I can't shake his hand, but you can't be that close to Samuel L. Jackson and do nothing. So I hollered, unabashed, "Samuel L. Just yell at me." He looked up, made eye contact. Looking impatient, he yelled over the crowd, "Boy, you all the way in the back." And that's how I was dismissed, but I acquired a story for a lifetime. Story 15. I might have met Christopher Walken while working at a fast food restaurant. This guy walks in that looks really familiar. I thought that maybe he came in a few days ago or something, and that's why he looked familiar. I take his order and I ask for a name to put on the order. He chuckles and says, "Chris." Why did he chuckle? I didn't know at the time. It wasn't until a few days later where it hit me that the guy looked like Christopher Walken. He said his name was Chris, and the reason he chuckled was probably because I didn't realize he was Christopher Walken.
What's your true life story that nobody will believe? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. My dad was married 2 times before my mom. When he was with his second wife, he would travel a lot for work, which I knew. What I didn't know is that one night he came home to find his wife in bed with another man. Actually walked in on them. He left the room and came back with a gun, shot the man dead, and wounded his wife. He turned himself in immediately and was sent to prison. He was sentenced to years in a maximum security prison. In the last year he was in prison, which was the 4th year, he got out for good behavior, and since the judge ruled it a crime of passion, he met the prison minister. The prison minister was my mom. My dad is a murderer, my mom was the minister. I am the product of a conjugal visit. Story 2. I met a guy online. We emailed and messaged. This was before texting was a thing, and went out a few times. I liked him but wasn't sure about it. He called me pretty regularly. Again, this was pre-texting. One day, no calls. That night I called and left him a message. No return call. I called his work the next day, and he hadn't shown up. I called the police, who did a well-person check at his house, but he wasn't there. I wasn't there. The next day, the police called me back. They'd found his body. He'd been murdered by one of his neighbors, and I had to testify at the trial. Story 3. My husband had the opportunity to operate on a gorilla's knee once. They have essentially the same anatomy as humans, so they ask human physicians to operate on them in many major zoos. It was really cool, and afterwards they gave him a painting done by the gorilla as thanks. Apparently the gorilla was going through some adolescent rank wars with other male gorillas and had his knee battered and bitten. Though the meniscus. I know, it's his story, not mine, but he doesn't get on the internet, and I think it's super cool, and I'm really proud of him. Edit. We had it framed with the thank you note from Mbele the gorilla and his trainer. Story 4. Long story short, I was asleep at a friend's. A kid who was there thought my friend's Cal handgun was a BB gun. He shot me in the left ass cheek, severed femoral vein, damaged femoral artery. Life support for a week and a half, 3 8-hour surgeries. Permanent femoral vein to femoral vein bypass, fake vein. And a little over a year later I'm back on my feet on my way to being normal again. Story 5. On my way home from school about 7 years ago, I was sitting at a very busy intersection waiting to turn left. It was very gloomy outside. All of a sudden, it sounded and felt like the back of my car exploded. There was also a quick, very bright light that flashed in my rearview mirror. I panicked and noticed immediately after that the stoplights stopped working, and it also began to rain. I looked out in the distance and saw a lightning strike. I also looked on either side of me where there was a ton of traffic, and everyone was staring at me like this. That's right, I was struck by lightning. Story 6. I am 15 years old in summer 1999. I had a meet and greet pass to an NSYNC concert in Michigan, got passed through fan club. I met them and gave them a letter about how much their music meant to me. I included my phone number at the end. A few days later I receive a phone call, and it's JC and Justin, called from a blocked number. I scream for my little sister to pick up another phone so she can hear. They said they got my letter and appreciated it and to stay in sync. No one ever believes this story, so I never tell it. Story 7. When I was 10 years old, I was dared by another kid to trip up the Prime Minister of the UK, who at the time was Tony Blair. I did it. Dude buckled like a little bish. Saw him 3 years afterwards, and I never made eye contact with him. Other story, got hit by a car twice in one day. Not the same car, thankfully, but it was on the same road, at separate times during that day. Edit. I'm getting asked where I do this. I can't remember the location exactly, but it was a dinner party that my grandparents were invited to. They know people in the government. Story 8. I know a girl who had an identical thing happen to her, except for the catfishing part. She was with her, so for about 7 years, and had never met his family. One day the guy's mom gives him an ultimatum. To come home for an arranged marriage, or the stay in the UK and the life he had now, and be forever disowned by his family. His family were very rich, and I think part of some kind of dynasty in India. He left his GF, photos of his marriage were on Facebook weeks later. He looked hollow. The girl was institutionalized for a while because of the emotional trauma. Story 9. My brothers and sister and I lived in poverty in New England for almost all of our lives. Too many nights where dinner was only an idea. Couldn't afford to buy me boxers in the 6th grade. Mother was endlessly caring yet endlessly plagued by severe alcoholism. It crippled our family. Father was too distant. Yet, one of us is a lieutenant at a fire department, 2 of us are teachers, 1 of us works for Major League Baseball, and the last one is applying to colleges to make their future better too. All being very successful. None of us resorted to drugs or drinking to resolve or mitigate our problems. I will never know how. I love my family to death. Story 10. My high school boyfriend died a day before I turned 18, the day I was going to pack up my stuff. We were going to elope and run away to North Dakota. He worked there and had been living there for 2 months at this point. He was older, handsome, ex-military, and I adored him. He called me from the road, and we exchanged the following words before he passed. Me. I love you. I look forward to seeing you tonight. You mean the world to me. You are my everything. Him. I love you too. I'd die a happy man if those words were the last words I ever heard. His phone record showed that was the last conversation he had on his phone. He was hit by a drunk driver less than 5 minutes later. Story 11. I was declared a divine gift by the monks of St. Catherine's Monastery in Egypt. The monastery was built around the alleged burning bush from the Book of Exodus, and since I was really into religions at the time, I asked the monks some questions about the bush and whether they have any other interesting relics in their monastery. The monks went silent and asked me and my family to follow them down to the gates of the burning bush. They let us see the alleged remnants of the burning bush, even though we are not Orthodox Christians. This is a privilege granted only to high officials in the Orthodox Church, and they said we were the first secular people to ever see the bush. After visiting the bush, the monks gave me some kind of a special blessing where they declared me as that divine gift and a silver ring with Greek writing on it. I was a kid at the time, so I didn't really react to it in an extravagant way, but my mom was dumbfounded for days, since she is a very religious person. Now at an older age, I'm just wondering if they do this every now and then as a prank, or if they actually saw something special in me. Story 12. I've had numerous wild creatures come up to me at random times, with absolutely zero fear. In college, I was walking through the woods that stretched between my dorm and the football field, where I parked my car. There was this clearing that overlooked the field, and the track team was practicing. My roommate was a vaulter, so I stopped to watch for a little bit, and leaned up against a tree. I had an apple in my purse, and eventually I felt this little nudge. A fawn had come up, and was nosing my bag. I stood stock still and just let it sniff me, and saw Mama Deer was a few feet away. Very slowly, I reached into my bag, and the baby bounded away. I took the apple and set it on the ground, and walked away really slowly. Later that afternoon, I was cutting through the woods again, and the apple was still there, but with bites out of it. I've also been hiking and had squirrels and bunnies come up to me with no issue. Birds will land near me and not fly away. It's pretty awesome, but because it will only happen when I'm alone, I don't tell anyone. It's like my own little secret that I may actually be Snow White. Story 13. Was praying one night about a purpose for my life while driving home. Was inexplicably moved to pull over on the side of the road to talk to a kid I saw sitting on a bench. We had in common the same name, age, and medical conditions. I have multiple sclerosis. Turns out he was sitting on the road due to a concussion he'd gotten earlier in the night, and needed me to drive him to the hospital. I've wanted to be a doctor ever since. Story 14. I've posted this before, but once at a friend's house on a somewhat cloudy day, I got caught in a conversation about astrological symbols. Everyone there was going on about how their symbol was the greatest, and I quickly found myself ostracized as I was the only Aries of the group. Being somewhat drunk and tired of them going on about what I thought was nonsense, I decided to jump on a chair facing the group and shouted in my most powerful war voice, "You think you are all so great? I am an Aries. Our element is fire. We are beholders of its pure raw energy. We are the bringers of light." As I shouted the final word, I threw my hands into the sky and was joined by a strike of lightning not a mile away from us, directly behind me in everyone's field of view. Jaws hit the floor, and after a minute of silence, my friend muttered, "Welp, we can't argue with that." Story 15. I lived on the R&D floor of my dorm, and yards away was the rooftop to the YMCA. I was doing some homework with the window open when I heard a guitar being played. I looked out and saw it was on the roof. Conveniently, I am an amateur banjo player, so I pulled it out and set my chair to the window. At this moment, my roommate walks into my room to ask me something and notices this. I turn to him and say, "Watch this." I then played the intro line to Dueling Banjos a few times until the guitar player heard me. At this moment, our eyes meet and crap goes down. We played the song and then laughed, and he went back to playing something, and I did my homework. Alright folks, that's a wrap. If you like this, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You can also share your those in the comment below.